Last week we are in chapter 11 and 12 when we ended. If you remember, we're going to start where we left off in chapter 12. I know this is fresh in your mind when we're talking about Miriam and Aaron that spoke against Moses. And they were just not too happy with their brother. And long story short is that God certainly wasn't happy about that. And God made it very clear that he chose Moses. And what happened is that Miriam, Moses' sister, ended up having leper for 7 days. And everything was fine. Nobody died, I guess, in that incident. So that was chapter 12. Then we move on in chapter 13. And in chapter 13, we see here the sin. And actually, through the second part of the book of Numbers, there's just a number of, I call this section, sins in the wilderness, because the people of Israel were just really having a hard time. They were already there for a couple of years, and they want to go back. Life was tough in the wilderness, no doubt about it. But if they had just listened to God, they would have gotten to the promised land much sooner. But last week also we started talking a little bit about, or maybe we didn't, right when the 12 spies. So they are ready to move into the promised land in chapter 13. And Moses says, okay, we're going to pick up a spy from every tribe and we're going to send 12 spies. And I'm going to have a couple of volunteers read just to get ourselves familiar with this context here. I think it's a pretty well representative section in the second part of the book of Numbers, and I want us to go to refamiliarize ourselves with the events that took place. So let's please take a volunteer and read chapter 13, verses 17 through 20. 17 through 20. This is when Moses sends the spies to spy the land of Canaan. Who shall start? Go ahead, Aaron.
Then Moses sent them to spy out the land of Canaan and said to them, "Go up this way into the south and go up to the mountains and see what the land is like, whether the people who dwell in it are strong or weak, few or many, whether the land they dwell in is good or bad, whether the cities they inhabit are like camps or strongholds, whether the land is rich or poor, and whether there are forests there or not. Be of good courage and bring some of the fruit of the land. Now the time was the season of the first ripe grapes."
Very good. And they go, so they went up, verse 21. Let's also read from 21 through 23, please. 21 to 23. Go ahead, Brad.
So they went up and spied out the land from the wilderness of Zin as far as Rehob, near the entrance of Hamath. And they went up through the south and came to Hebron, Ahiman, Shashai, and Talmai. The descendants of Anak were there. Now Hebron was built 7 years before Zoan in Egypt. Then they came to the valley of Eshcol, and there cut down a branch with one cluster of grapes. They carried it between two of them on a pole. They also brought some of the pomegranates and figs.
So imagine two people carrying one, bunch of grapes, right? I mean, they must have been huge. I've seen big clusters of grapes, but not one that has to be carried by two people. So clearly, the land was great, right? So how long were they spy the land? Remember? 40 days. So 40 days they're in the land of Canaan. And 40 days later, then we read chapter 26. Let's please read all the way to verse 29. 26 to 29. Let's say what their report was when they came back. Lisa?
Chapter 13, right?
Yes, please.
Now they departed and came back to Moses and Aaron and all the congregation of the children of Israel in the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh. They brought back word to them and to all the congregation and showed them the fruit of the land. Then they told him and said, "We went to the land where you sent us. It truly flows with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. Nevertheless, the people who dwell in the land are strong. The cities are fortified and very large. Moreover, we saw the descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites dwell in the land of the south. The Hittites, the Jebusites, and the Amorites dwell in the mountains. And the Canaanites dwell by the sea and along the banks of the Jordan.
So they come back and they give two reports, right? The first, we read about the report of Caleb. And I love this because it starts positive. Caleb is a man of God, man full of faith. And what is the report that Caleb brings in verse 30? Let's read verse 30. Who wants to read verse 30? Okay?
Then Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, "Let us go up at once and take possession, for we are well able to overcome it."
So you see the faith there, and I hope as we slow down a little bit, you see Caleb, whatever adversity, whatever the other 10 spies saw, that's not what Caleb saw, right? Because he saw everything from the prism of God's faith that he had. So he said, let's go and we can take it. We will be able to overcome it. But verse 31, let's please read verse 31 through the end of the chapter to verse 33. The other 10, the majority, were not so excited. Okay, you want to finish that?
But the men who had gone up with him said, We are not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we. And they gave the children of Israel a bad report of the land which they had spied out, saying, "The land through which we have gone as spies is a land that devours its inhabitants, and all the people whom we saw in it are men of great stature. There we saw giants, the descendants of Anak, and we came from giants, and we were like grasshoppers in our own sight, and so we were in their sight."
So the spies are gone for 40 days. They come back with two reports. One report, the men in the land are going to destroy us. No way. We're going to prevail against them. And the other one is, we can't wait to go there. We can take them. Very opposing. So only Caleb and Joshua trusted and believed the Lord. So then we go into chapter 14 when Israel, they decide, right, the consensus were the majority of the people that we're not going to go into the Canaan land. And it's very sad. Chapter 14 is a very sad chapter, although I wanted to read a bit through it because it just kind of gives us a window into the mind of a person that doesn't put their faith in God and maybe how the kind of people that we shouldn't be, right? So let's see what happens after these two reports were presented to the people. So first we see, let's have a volunteer read verses 1 through 4. 1 through 4. Who wants to read this? Jeff?
So all the congregation lifted up their voices and cried, and the people wept that night. And all the children of Israel complained against Moses and Aaron, and the whole congregation said to them, "If only we had died in the land of Egypt, or if only we had died in this wilderness. Why has the Lord brought us to this land to fall by the sword, that our wives and children should become victims? Would it not be better for us to return to Egypt?" So they said to one another, "Let us select a leader and return to Egypt."
Can you imagine? So not only that they are murmuring against not going forward, they want to go back. Forget all the progress we made so far, how God brought us all to this point. Let's just go back. Very sad, very sad. So I think that as much as this is a sad story that we're reading, oftentimes we see this kinds of story in our day and age when people don't have faith for God to carry them forward. And oftentimes in life when you don't see a path going forward, sometimes it certainly takes faith to really go forward. And what do normal people, sometimes people do, people with no faith? They stick with what they know. They want to go back to what it was something secure for them, right? Brad?
I was just going to say, I think a lot of times when calamity strikes, a lot of people, will forget about all the blessings, and they always focus on that negativity. And I agree with what you and Tracy says, like it's human nature to fall back on what your comfort is. So wherever you were comfortable with at first, because they were slaves in Israel, but Barrett and I were kind of debating that back and forth. It was like, how bad was it really in Israel that they had that land and they had some flocks? And yeah, they were forced to work, but they even mentioned, we had all the fish we could want. And so it was like, okay, how bad was it really? Bad enough that they cried about it, but they're constantly whining.
Human nature, certainly human nature, I would say fleshly nature, right? It takes you back to what you did, depend on yourself, you rely on yourself, but the godly nature is trust in me. I can take you further. I have plans for you. Yes, ma'am.
Were these the people that came through the Red Sea
Of course. They saw the miracles. That's why the outrage here on God's behalf and Moses. Haven't you seen how the Lord has carried you, and haven't you been witness to everything that's been happening? Barrett?
I was asked to do a highly controversial lesson on they're trying to get me fired is what they're trying to do.
Well, you're trying with your controversial lessons.
So every time they go to war, it was God who brought them through.
Of course.
It was God. That was the
Right.
only reason they won.
Yes.
It was because they were faithful to God.
Right.
And God did the work.
Right.
And like every time a war occurred and they won, it was because God accomplished it. When they brought them through the
Right.
through the Red Sea, it was because God did it.
Right.
So the question is, can Christians be in the military and fight in war? I'm like, what I see from everywhere from the beginning of time where wars have started is because of money, power, and it's like, so what side would you be on? Like, see, they were fighting, God was fighting their wars. And it's like, it becomes highly controversial as soon as you
Right.
start moving into the New Testament on what that is. But
Well, right.
it's interesting because you can see as soon as they stop keeping the commandments, they lost
Yeah.
wars.
Well, right. So obviously, I don't want to go back into what we had the conversation about the controversy of war and is lawful for a man. Keep in mind, those are the kinds of war that God intentionally told them, go do that. But I'll tell you, in our day and age in this country, it's definitely not God, the one that tells. And the latest thing that I saw, it was kind of sad that the United States vetoed the peace, the peace plans for the wars going on right now in Palestine and around Israel. So God tells you do something, of course you're going to do it, but it's different when a government tells you let's go and invade the country next door and you're going to do it because we believe that it should be done. It's definitely a controversial matter, and to some extent it becomes a matter of individual, how they feel about it. Personally, I've studied this issue in all kinds of ways, and my opinion, I'm going to make it because I'm not afraid to share my opinions. As far as I'm concerned, I think it's extremely hard, close to impossible, for someone to serve in the military and serve God. I know that's not an easy statement to make, but to me, you know, Sunday morning comes and your commanding officer say, guess what? Today's training day. You're not going to church. And you have to choose between going to church or going to worship God or going to the camp. And what are you going to do? Well, right? Who's your master? You cannot serve two masters. So, of course, you end up going what your commanding officer is telling you to do. But some Christians are able to do that. And certainly, I don't make that a test of fellowship. It's extremely, extremely hard. Maybe it's just the way that I'm made up because, you know, I cannot, other than God, I cannot have anybody telling me what to do, especially if it opposes to the will of God. But you see, we took on a tangent. I just, but I appreciate the conversation. So back here, and we're going to go to discuss to some of the wars they're going to be having for sure, and how God will help them, and how God will deliver them. And of course, the victory belonged to the Lord, and the Lord is the one that won the battle, but the people also, they had to do certain things. Like what happened if the Israelites said, well, we're not going to march 7 times, we're not going to do our part. So you still, and that is a reflection on our part that we need to do in whatever successes and achievement we want to achieve. Of course, God will get the glory, and we're doing it along God's side, but we still have to do our part, right? We still have to lead with faith. We still have to really obey God. John?
When I became a member of the Church of Christ, I was happy, but then after a while, I started thinking, wait a minute, you know, what I've done kind of caused division between my family and I. It caused my childhood friends that I came out of a very tight religion. You know, they don't talk to me anymore, and I was, you know, and I was missing all that stuff. You know, and like I was thinking, I said to myself, I think I want to go back.
Yeah, yeah.
Because I didn't have that here,
Yeah, right.
at first, but it did cross my mind. You know, I
Yeah.
want to go back and just, you know, have that fellowship with
Right, right, because you end up missing that, indeed.
my family.
Yes, and that's exactly what they want to go back. They want to go back. Not only they don't even want to go to enter Canaan, but they are so afraid they want to go back. Thankfully, verse 6. Let's please read verse 6 through 9. We are in chapter 14, 6 through 9. Tracy.
But Joshua the son of Nun and Caleb the son of Jephunneh, who were among those who had spied out the land, tore their clothes, and they spoke to all the congregation of the children of Israel, saying, The land we passed through to spy out is exceedingly good land. If the Lord delights in us, then he will bring us into this land and give it to us, a land which flows with milk and honey. Only do not rebel against the Lord, nor fear the people of the land, for they are our bread. Their protection has departed from them, and the Lord is with us. Do not fear them.
So Joshua and Caleb try to really persuade the people, hey, we can do this. God will lead us. With God we can do it. And then what is the response of the people? Very, very sad. Why don't you read verse 10 and verse 10, please?
And all the congregation said to stone them with stones. Now the glory of the Lord appeared in the tabernacle of meeting before all the children of Israel.
Yes, so not only their opinion was unwelcome, they're going to say, we're going to let's kill these people, because they didn't even want to listen to them. You see how far they were. So in verse 11, I love verse 11, because now the Lord pretty much has had it. And let's please read verses 11 and 12 to see what the response of God was in the sight of all this foolishness and all this rebellion. Brad?
Then the Lord said to Moses, How long will these people reject me? And how long will they not believe me, with all the signs which I have performed among them? I will strike them down with the pestilence and disinherit them, and I will make of you a nation greater and mightier than they.
So we see here the Lord being very upset, and I like how Moses approaches God and really changes God's mind. It looks like God was ready to just destroy that whole generation and start over. But then Moses speaks on behalf of the people and asks God. So we're only gonna read verses 17 and 19, 2 verses. Who wants to read this? Verses, Lisa?
And now I pray that the power of my Lord be great, just as he has spoken, saying, and then you want me to jump to 19?
No, just 17 to 19.
Oh, the Lord is long-suffering and abundant in mercy, forgiving iniquity and transgression. But he by no means clears the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers of the children to the third and fourth generation. Pardon the iniquity of this people, I pray, according to the greatness of your mercy, just as you have forgiven this people from Egypt even until now.
So you see the spirit of Moses saying, please pardon their sin. Please forgive them for your name's sake. And something quite amazing happens, and something that it's something that we learn about God from this exchange that happens between Moses and God. Because God actually, I love God's response in verse 20. Let's please read verse 20. I can have a volunteer. We're going to read from verse 20 all the way to 25. Who wants to read this? 25. Aaron?
Then the Lord said, I have parted according to your word, but truly as I live, all the earth shall be filled with the glory of the Lord. Because all these men who have seen my glory and the signs which I did in Egypt and in the wilderness, and have put me to the test now these 10 times, and have not heeded my voice, they certainly shall not see the land of which I swore to their fathers, nor shall any of those who rejected me see it. But my servant Caleb, because he has a different spirit in him, and has followed me fully, I will bring into the land where he went, and his descendants shall inherit it. Now the Amalekites and the Canaanites dwell in the valley. Tomorrow turn and move out into the wilderness by the way of the Red Sea.
So we see here God is very pleased with Caleb. And even though God agreed to not destroy them, in a sense, they will perish in the wilderness, right? But as we bump into someone as faithful as Caleb, certainly we need to learn how we can be more like Caleb. And that is when we go in faith. right? So it's hard sometimes because sometimes you don't see in front of you, but God says go for it, even though you don't see. You walk by faith, not by sight. So that's the exchange that happened between Moses and God in chapter 14. And then we continue in chapter 14 because that's not it. Then what happens next, it's very important. Let's please read, somebody read verse 26 through 29. 26 to 29, who wants to read this? Aaron? Kay?
And the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, how long shall I bear with the evil congregation who complained against me? I have heard the complaints which the children of Israel make against me. Say to them, as I live, says the Lord, just as you have spoken in my hearing, so I will do to you. The carcasses of you who have complained against me shall fall in this wilderness, all of who were numbered according to your entire number, from 20 years old and above. And keep going.
Actually, let's also read verse 32 to 34.
Okay, except for Caleb the son of Jephunneh and Joshua the son of Nun, you shall by no means enter the land which I swore I would make you dwell in. But your little ones whom you said would be victims I will bring in, and they shall know the land which you have despised. But as for you, your carcasses shall fall in the wilderness, and your sons shall be shepherds in the wilderness 40 years, and bear the brunt of the infidelity until your carcasses are consumed in the wilderness. How far did you
I'm sorry, go please to 35.
Okay, sorry.
That's fine.
Finish the paragraph. According to the number of days in which you spied out the land, 40 days. For each day you shall bear your guilt 1 year, naming 40 years. And you shall know my redemption. I, the Lord, have spoken this. I will surely do so to all this evil congregation who are gathered together against me. In this wilderness they shall be consumed, and there they shall die.
So, God sets a proclamation here. You're going to be in the wilderness 1 year for every day, 40 years. And this generation is going to pass away. And only those that are 20 years or older, younger, that reminds us of the age of accountability. Obviously, it just brings the age of when someone is like mature maybe, or can be held accountable for what they say and what they think. But 40 years, they have this sentence. They're gonna be in the desert, and they're gonna die in the desert. That whole generation. And then last in this section, let's please also read verses 36 through 38.
Brother, I have a question.
Yes.
You said this generation, is that what the Bible said?
Well, I mean, I don't know if it says the generation, but yeah, it will be in a sense a generation, because a generation normally is 20 years, right? That's really what a generation is. So they're going to be more than just a generation. If you're going to wipe an entire group age, right? I mean, anybody that's 20 years old to maybe 60 years old, that is definitely a generation, right? So that generation is going to die. And then the next generation, their children that are 20 years or older, kids pretty much, that is the generation. And I think in some sections of other scriptures maybe it does say that this generation is going to be destroyed in the wilderness. Yes, ma'am.
I think it's interesting too that Caleb and Joshua, their wives are never mentioned that they're going to be saved.
It was probably single.
But then they said their descendants, which means they had to have kids.
Possible.
So 20 and under
Possible.
would go with them. I guess they could be a young man.
They could have been a young man at the time.
Not-
Right.
Yeah.
They were older than 20.
But they had to be older than 20 and then.
They all were older than 20. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, very good. Lisa, you want to read, because something now drastic is happening to the 10 spies in these verses 36 through 39, please, to 38.
Now the men whom Moses sent to spy out the land, who returned and made all the congregation complain against him by bringing a bad report of the land, those very men who brought the evil report about the land died by the plague before the Lord. But Joshua the son of Nun and Caleb the son of Jephunneh remained alive, of the men who went up to spy out the land.
So you see the 10 get doomed by a plague, and actually in the remaining part of chapter 14, we see them that they acknowledge their mistakes. Say, oh man, we shouldn't have done that. And they actually organize in groups to invade Canaan. They want to do that. If you read the context there, and others wanted to organize themselves and go back to Egypt. And of course, both attempts failed. It didn't go through, I guess. So they got stuck in the desert, just inaction. So then chapter 15, we're not going to cover too detailed chapter 15. It changes a bit the subject, and he talks about the laws and laws of the grain and the drink offering, laws concerning unintentional sin, laws concerning the presumptuous sin, penalties for violating the Sabbath, and that was pretty serious. I'm not going to read too much of that, but I want to go to chapter 16, because in chapter 16, it's again a very representative chapter in the book of Numbers, as we see the rebellion against Moses and Aaron. This time is by Korah. And he was like a ringleader and gathered some people around with him, 250 priests. That was no small gathering of people. 250 priests. Can you imagine 250 priests? These are supposed to be the people of closest to God. Under Korah's direction, rebel and seek. What do they want? They wanted more power. They wanted more preeminence. They wanted to be acknowledged. Let's see what they wanted. So, let's please read verses 1 through 3. Who wants to read this? Jeff?
Now Korah, the son of Izhar, the son of Kohath, the son of Levi, with Dathan and Abiram, the son of Eliah, and the son of Pelah, the sons of Reuben, took men, and they rose up before Moses with some of the children of Israel, 250 leaders of the congregation, representatives of the congregation, men of renown. They gathered together against Moses and Aaron and said to them, "You take too much upon yourselves, for all the congregation is holy, every one of them, and the Lord is among them. Why then do you exalt yourselves above the assembly of the Lord?"
So not very, they just thought that they're going to establish themselves somehow with more authority than they had. And of course, Moses' response was quite sad. It says here in verse 4 that he fell on his face and tried to reason with them, tried to talk some senses into them, and but of course he failed. They're not willing to listen to him. Let's please read their response then what happened in verse 12. Let's please read from 12 to 14 now. 12 to 14. Lisa, you got that?
12 to 14.
Yes, please.
And Moses sent to call Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Eliab, and they said, "We will not come up. Is it a small thing that, that you have brought us up out of the land flowing with milk and honey, to kill us in the wilderness, that you should keep acting like a prince over us? Moreover, you have not brought us into the land flowing with milk and honey, nor given us an inheritance of fields and vineyards. Will you put out the eyes of these men? We will not come up." To 17, you said?
Just to 16.
Then Moses was very angry and said to the Lord, "Do not respect their offering. I have not taken one donkey from them, nor have I hurt one of them." And Moses said to Korah, "Tomorrow you and all your company be present before the Lord, you and they, as well as Aaron. Let each take his censer." Oops. To 16.
That's fine. Well, you know a little bit about the story because everybody does take their censer, and God intervenes and talks to Moses about. God listens to Moses because pretty much he asks God, "Please help. What am I going to do with these people?" And then after having a discussion with God, we see what happens in verse 28. Let's please read verse 28 to 30 now, as is representative for this verse, for this chapter. 28 to 30. Volunteer, please, Aaron.
And Moses said, "By this you shall know that the Lord has sent me to do all these works, for I have not done them of my own will. If these men die naturally like all men, or if they are visited by the common fate of all men, then the Lord has not sent me. But if the Lord creates a new thing, and the earth opens its mouth and swallows them up with all that belongs to them, and they go down alive into the pit, then you will understand that these men have rejected the Lord."
Yes, so what happens next? Verse 31 says, "Now it came to pass as he finished speaking all these words that the ground split apart under them, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed them up with their households and all their men with Korah, with all their goods. So they and all those with them went down alive into the pit. The earth closed over them, and they perished from among the assembly. That's what happened. So all of them, with their families, everything they had. So that's what happens when we speak against God. That's what happens when we speak against the anointed one of God. So then, what happens, it's a little mind-boggling, because the very next day, you think the people learned some lesson from what happened. The very next day, what happened with the people? The very next day, verse 41. Let's please read verse 41 through verse 45. Who wants to read this? 41 through 45. Volunteer. Okay.
On the next day, all the congregation of the children of Israel complained against Moses and Aaron, saying, "You have killed the people of the Lord." Now it happened, when the congregation had gathered against Moses and Aaron, that they turned toward the tabernacle of meeting, and suddenly the cloud covered it, and the glory of the Lord appeared. Then Moses and Aaron came before the tabernacle of meeting, and the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Get away from among this congregation, that I may consume them in a moment." And they fell on their faces. So,
That's fine. No, you're fine. So if you want, actually, let's please read to the end here, because see what happens with these other people that complain. So please read now. Okay, keep on reading. You're a good reader. Just go to verse 50.
So Moses said to Aaron, "Take a censer and put fire in it from the altar, but incense on it, and take it quickly to the congregation, and make atonement for them, for wrath has gone out from the Lord. The plague has begun." Then Aaron took it as Moses commanded, and ran into the midst of the assembly, and already the plague had begun among the people. So he put in the incense and made atonement for the people, and he stood between the dead and the living, so the plague was stopped. Now those who died in the plague were 14,700, besides those who died in Korah's incident. So Aaron returned to Moses at the door of the tabernacle of meeting, for the plague has stopped.
250 priests and their family the day before, and then the next day, 14,700. That's a lot of people. John?
Last week I invited a childhood friend of mine to Barrett's Bible study, and he said, "No, I don't want to have anything to do with the Bible, because when I start reading the Bible, I see how God is, and He destroyed a lot of people, and that's really mean, and I don't want to have anything to do with the Bible."
Right.
And what do you say when somebody says that? What are you going to do? I mean, he made up his mind. It was like, okay, that's interesting.
Well, who are you? I mean, who are we to question what God does, whether we understand it or not? Mark?
How about you're next?
Or prepare. Mark?
To me, it's so funny to see how Aaron and Moses are completely the people's babysitter, because every single time that they mess up, every single time, the second that God said, "Get away from them, I'm going to destroy all of them," they ran quickly to go get forgiveness.
Yeah,
for them, because
yeah.
They're like, "Oh, we gotta get forgiveness for people."
Right. But He's full of compassion. That's exactly what He does. It would be very natural to say, yeah, destroy them,
That could be why God picked him.
Maybe, yes. For sure. Rhett?
And we're going to go through the next 400 years and see the repetition.
Yes,
of the same
starts
problem
same thing over and
until
over.
they are taken away completely in Babylon.
Yeah. And then Assyrian captivity never even come back.
You almost wonder
Right.
if Moses should have held his peace.
Right. But the next generation came still the same rebellious people.
What I mean, if he would have held his peace.
Right.
Started off with Moses.
Right.
But I don't know.
And maybe we wouldn't have to have a war now in Iraq, on that side of the world, in Iran. No, in Israel there. There's a war going on right now. So then chapter 17, we see the budding of Aaron's rod, which confirms God's choice, who He wants to be in charge. And then chapter 18, we see a lot of duties of the priests and then the Levites. We're not going to go too deep into this, offering for support of the priests and tithes for support of the Levites and tithes for the Levites. Very detailed here. I'm not going to take time to read through follow through chapter 18 unless anybody has any question about what we've read here. Then we go to chapter 19, and also we're not going to cover this too much in depth. It talks about the laws of purification. And then we see in chapter 20 an important passage here, an important chapter, because we see Moses' error at Kadesh. So what happened at Kadesh? Somebody wants to abbreviate it in 30 seconds or less? Yes, Brad?
Moses was supposed to speak to a rock, but he hid it,
Mm-hmm.
and now he can't go into the land of Canaan.
Yes, exactly. Not sure exactly why he did that. You know, maybe God says that you taking credit wasn't yours. I told you to do one thing, you didn't. I guess steep punishment, that's for sure.
I feel like when I was reading it, and I don't know if it was just putting
Yeah.
the emotion into it, it feels like Moses is just fed up with the people,
Right.
and it was like this lash of anger
Right,
and frustration. But
Right.
you know, it's like all the things that the people did, and they would be able to be forgiven, but Moses slips up once.
right.
And nope, you can't go to the land of Canaan. It did seem harsh, yet he's the leader of all of these people.
Yeah.
And he's like, God's in charge.
Yes.
But Moses is the chosen leader, and this was his slip up, and it's again, there's
Right.
punishment for everything.
And it's possible that we don't have a full understanding of what happened there. I mean, and again, I'm not going to judge what God did to say maybe that was not fair. Of course, we can't say that. Everything that God does is righteous. Joy?
But it does say down in verse 12, and the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, because you did not believe me to hallow me in the eyes
Right,
of the children of
right,
Israel.
right, right,
It was because he said
right.
up in verse 10, here now you rebels, must we bring water for you?
Like it was from him, right?
Yeah, it was like he did it.
Yeah.
He did it in front of all the children of
Right,
Israel.
right, right.
You know, it wasn't an isolated incident.
Right.
He did it in front of everybody.
In public, yeah.
So,
It's true. No, definitely. So obviously that's a very egregious scene with God. You don't take the credit. Anything that God does is because God does it for us. It's not that we've contributed somehow to the goodness of God.
That's a good lesson for all of us.
Yes.
To remember that's not what
To
we
not
do.
take the credit, yes.
Very
We are
easy to
only,
take the
yes,
credit.
exactly.
It's really not us.
No,
Everything we have, that's great.
it's
comes from
true.
God.
It's absolutely true.
And when God said, you know, only Joshua and Caleb and 20 and under are going, Moses didn't think, oh, well, he didn't say Moses. He
Yeah.
didn't say-
Well, maybe, right.
No, he didn't mention anybody else. I think I would have had like, oh,
Yeah, but at the time, we have every reason to believe that God didn't exclude him, right? At that time. It didn't happen until later, until this happened, that God says, okay, now you're not going to go into the land because of this. Because it was very much because of this reason you won't, right? So, but that is chapter 20, and it continues in chapter 20. We see later they're moved to Meribah. So that happened in Meribah, actually, and because of disobedience, as I mentioned, Moses didn't enter into the promised land. So then we go to chapter 21, and we see here the beginning of several battles that they had, but very important in chapter 21 is the instance with the bronze serpent. Because people murmur against the Lord, God gave them to deal with serpents. So God sends fiery serpents. Many people are bitten, and many die. And the people confess their sins and ask for the serpents to be removed. And what does God tell Moses to do?
Make a fiery
Take a serpent, right? Bronze. When they get bitten, look at it, and then you will not die. How's that? Well, we'll take it. Sure beats dying. That would be a drag. So, yeah, we don't want to die. So, that's what happens. And then that is definitely a great antitype for us as we think about Jesus. And in some other contexts in scriptures, they talk about Jesus being like that serpent that Moses raised in the wilderness. And we look at Jesus, and that's how we are saved, and we are cured of our sin, and we are forgiven. So there's a very strong parallel here as a foreshadow of Jesus' death on the cross, and how people looking at him, at Jesus, they would be healed. So then, that pretty much takes us to chapter 22. And chapter 22, we see the story of Balak and Balaam. This is a great story. I really love this section of scriptures here because we see Balak, which was who was Balak? Balak was a king, right? Balak was a king. Balaam was a prophet, and Balak reaches out to Balaam and says, "Hey, come and curse these people because I'm afraid of them." And of course, he doesn't. And instead, he blesses them, and he doesn't like it. But he had to do what he had to do. He was honest, although he really, really wanted to curse them. But God says, "Don't." So it's kind of torn between a rock and a hard place, and he begrudgingly does what God tells him to do. Yes?
Was Balaam a prophet of God? Because he wasn't an Israelite.
It's true. Somehow he was a prophet. That means God spoke through him. He has conversations with God, right? He understands the messages of God. He is able to convey it to Balak and the king and everybody. So, and obviously God does whatever God wants to do, and not what Balak and Balaam wants God to do. So, long story short, the nation of Israel is very blessed. The nation of Israel wins all kinds of battles. We see here a lot of like Barrett mentioned earlier, that they engage in many battles, and with God's help, they will win with many battles and in many wars that he had. So then we go to chapter 24, I think we are, and we still see the incident between Balak and Balaam, and I love it here how Balaam responds to Balak. Let's please read just verses 12 and 13, please. Because he goes back and forth, and about 4 times he's asking him to curse. He said, "No, I won't. I can only do whatever the word of the Lord says that I should do." Verses 12 to 14, who wants to read this? Aaron?
Chapter 24.
We are in chapter 24, yes.
So Balaam said to Balak, "Did I not also speak to your messengers whom you sent to me, saying, if Balak were to give me his house full of silver and gold, I could not go beyond the word of the Lord, to do good or bad of my own will? But the Lord says that I must speak. And now indeed I am going to my people. Come, I will advise you what this people will do to your people in the latter days."
So really what happens is that lesson from us from this context is that we only speak whatever God says, right? We can't just go beyond to do our own will. If God didn't say, we shouldn't be presumptuous also, but yes, Red.
When she just read that, and it says, "I'm going to my people."
Yes.
Is he an Israelite? In some way, shape, or form? Verse 19.
It's possible. It's very possible. I mean, it doesn't say here because it kind of just say out of the blue. I mean, we don't know a whole lot about Balaam, but
When he says, "I'm going to my people, come, I will advise you what this people will do to your people in the latter days."
right. Well, what's going to happen in the future? Because of course we know what's going to happen in the future because they will be destroyed eventually.
I just wondered.
Yes. But that turns us past verse 24, and I wish we had more time to read through the entire chapter, and because very fascinating how Balaam goes back and forth with God, and how God keeps on repeating, these are my people. I'm not, you better not curse them. So even though the people just end up being really rebellious and really upset God, what does God do? God still loves them, right? It's kind of like you have a child, right? And they rebel against you, and they're really not very good son or daughter, right? And what do you do as a parent? You keep on loving them. You keep on...
What was it? 40,
Yeah.
What is it? 40, what was the number?
70 times 7. Yes, exactly.
Sorry, my brain.
That's okay. That's okay.
We have to forgive. We all have to forgive.
Yes,
We have to forgive and
absolutely.
forgive and forgive.
Absolutely. So then we end up in chapter 25, and we see Israel harlotry with Moab. I'm going to go fairly quickly through this because verse 9 says, "And those who died in the plague, another plague comes on, and 24,000 people died now." 24,000 more died, 14,700 earlier. Seems like groups and groups of people, they were just dying because they were doing what God asked them not to do. In this case, they're committing harlotry with the women of Moab. And then we go to chapter 26. In chapter 26, we see the second census that was taking place. In the beginning, when we started studying this book last week, we mentioned that the book of Numbers, why is it called the book of Numbers? Because of the two censuses that are happening. One right in the beginning of the book of Numbers, and the second census happening right here in chapter 20. In chapter 26, we're not going to read through this, but we're going to go to chapter 27, because chapter 27, I just want to emphasize on something important here, because there's actually a group of women that come to Moses and say, hey, whatever's happening, I don't think it's fair. What was the thing that was unfair here in their mind? Inheritance. They were not getting any inheritance. So they came to Moses and said, hey, this is not fair. And I love Moses' response. What does Moses say? Moses say, I'm going to take the case to the Lord. I mean, how wise is that? And then when I read this, I thought about Kay as I was reading with my family. So Kay will see that God is fair and God takes the side of the women here. So Kay, why don't you read? Okay, guys, stop giving her a hard time. So, Kay, do you want to... What? Tracy. Kay,
No, I act it on.
can you please read verses 5 through 11?
So Moses brought their case before the Lord, and the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, The daughters of Zephaniah spoke what is right. You shall surely give them a possession of inheritance among their father's brothers, and cause the inheritance of their father to pass to them. And you shall speak to the children of Israel, saying, If a man dies and has no son, then you shall cause the inheritance to pass to his daughter. If he has no daughter, then she shall give the inheritance to his brothers. If he has no brothers, then he shall give his inheritance to his father's brothers. And if his father has no brothers, then he shall give his inheritance to the relative closest to him and his family, and he shall possess it. And it shall be to the children of Israel a statute of judgment, just as the Lord commanded Moses.
Very good. So you see, God says, yep, they're right, and then I will make judgment, and they will have their inheritance. So it's very important. Obviously,
They had to marry their uncles. Just saying.
well,
They didn't get a pick. I mean,
well,
they had to
right.
choose from the uncles.
right.
But, I mean that.
Well, Well, I mean, they had the inheritance, and to some extent, keep in mind that women, God gives them more than just the inheritance. I mean, there's your land. Who's going to work it? I mean, they had to have people to, the same thing, if the law about somebody dying and the woman being with no husband now, she would have to marry maybe the next brother or something, but it was not easy because, that sure beat the woman being alone, right? So, because it's very hard for a woman by herself to work the land, right?
It's kind of preemptive, isn't it? Because they have no land yet.
Well, yeah, but you're going to have it, right? Yes. So, then we go to chapter 28, and we have a lot of daily offering here that we're not going to read through, and monthly offering, and offerings at Passover, and offerings at the Feast of the Weeks. And then we're going to go into chapter 29 when we see that there's the day of the offering at the Feast of the Trumpet. So is established here a day of blowing the trumpets. We're not going to go too deep into that, but
So, Yoda,
yes, sir.
that second census, this has been the 40 years, right? Is that why, that those older people have
Yes.
Have died
Yes.
in the wilderness, and those
You're correct. Yes.
younger are
Yes.
now old.
Yeah, I believe that. I believe that actually the second census happened towards the later part of, towards the end of the year 40. So before entering Canaan, instructions were given to count the people again.
And everything that we're kind of skimming through
Right.
now, all these laws, all these feasts, all these offerings, this generation
Right.
wasn't taught that until now.
Right, start over.
Or maybe
Well, a
as they
lot of the
grow
things
up.
were kept through because obviously there were writings and so
Right.
forth.
But they're constantly repeating
Right.
it, just like
Right,
we
right.
still
Right,
study and we
right,
reread the,
right,
the
right.
same thing, right?
Right, so Joshua selected as a leader. We go into that happened in chapter 27. We read, and then we have in chapter 30 the law concerning vows, and I liked it here because it only picks on the women. That means if a woman. No, it's good. I thought it was good because.
She can't say anything.
No. Well, right, but the point here is that if a woman said something, made a vow, right? If had a way out for her to get out of that vow, as opposed to a man, if you make a vow, you're stuck. So I try to look at it in a positive light. So if you are a young person and you make a vow and you don't want to keep the vow, there's a way that if your father was there, say, nope, that's not a vow, hold that vow against her. Then the woman can exit that vow. As opposed to if you are a man, you made a vow, guess what? You are bound to keep that vow. So, I see it as a way that it's softer for women to get out of that vow. She's protected. It's a layer of protection, yes. Or the same thing with a man. That if a man is there to pretty much cancel that vow, she's protected again, right? So I saw it in a positive light. So I thought, because I asked my family when we were reading, it's like, why is this only for women and not for men? And maybe because men, you make a vow, guess what? There's no... your father can't cancel it for you. You're stuck. And I know that in our day and age, when you think of vows, it's like, oh, just another vow. Break another promise. But when you make a promise, when you make a vow, it was very serious. You don't just break your vows that you made before God. Yeah.
It could be, too, that she didn't own anything, so whatever she vowed, he's going to
Maybe didn't.
He didn't lose it, and she didn't promise.
Well, but it's not just about the things that she owed. It's not just about her possession. It's any vow in general, right? So it's any vow. It's not just specific only to the things she possessed or not. So I saw it as a positive. So then Joshua was selected the new leader, and then Moses identified 6 cities of refuge. We're not going to read through that, but we see in chapter 21, vengeance is taken on the Midianites. I'm sorry? Didn't I say 31?
You said 21.
I'm sorry, 31. Yes, we already passed 21. So we see some wars that are happening through. Then in chapter 32, we see the tribes settling east of Jordan. So, something that stayed with me in this chapter here, chapter 32, is that we see the children of Reuben actually and the children of Gad, very great multitude of livestock. And what was their request here? Let's just not go in the promised land. We're happy here. This is perfectly fine for us. We don't want to go in the promised land. Right? Wouldn't that make sense? I'm happy here. And that is a lot of applications for us, right? We get to a place in life, but I'm comfortable. I don't need to do anything to go any way further. God, I'm fine here.
It sounds to me like it was more for the grazing of their animals. It was lush and it was big and there was plenty of room for all their cattle and they wanted to stay on that side.
Well, right. But, that means for them to settle there and stay there, not going we'll stay here. We don't have to cross over the land of Canaan. But it was from a place of lack of faith, because it's like, what? The land of Canaan doesn't have patches there? Of course it does.
Well, yeah.
So, the context here, it's pretty much, he says, these people say, please do not take us over Jordan. They wanted to remain on the other side of Jordan. That means stay in the wilderness. I don't want to cross in the promised land. Of course, it goes on because pretty much Moses says, no, you will go. They say you can go back afterwards, but, we're going to go in the promised land because that's what God has in store for us. Yes?
Well, when I was reading through this, I didn't really see a big problem with it because promised land, here's this beautiful land.
Right.
But your men are going to go and we're going to take this land by war.
Right.
But you can go ahead and build your cities, keep your cities, and keep all this,
Right.
all your women here. God protected them. I didn't see a big of a problem with God originally because God let them.
Well, I mean, their point is that they didn't want to go in the land of, they want to cross Jordan. And actually with God, of course, you had to cross Jordan, the promised land. And they wanted to just stay there and not go over Jordan.
Well, in verse 1 it says, Now the children of Reuben and the children of Gad had a very great multitude of
Yeah.
livestock. And when they saw the land of Jazer and the land of Gilead, that indeed the region was a place for livestock, the children, they spoke to Eleazar the priest and the leaders. I mean, it was just more a matter of economics. You know, I mean, it's not a lack of faith. It's just they saw.
Well,
I don't think it was a lack of faith. They said,
Well.
you know, we're going to take this by war. You have to go with us and fight. And they said, oh yeah, we're going to do that. That's not a problem.
well, I mean, what happened, I mean, that's really what Moses tells them. Moses tells them, shall we go out and fight in war while you sit here? And afterwards, I agree with you. They probably said, okay, I guess we'll go. But initially, they didn't want to go. Initially, they want to stay behind.
Well, yeah, in verse 7, now why will you discourage the hearts of the children of Israel from going over into the land which the Lord has given them? So, whether it's for
Right.
economics or
Right.
lack of faith, Moses is wise enough to sit there and see that if I let you stay, it's
Yeah.
going to cause a big issue
Right.
with everyone. And they found that
Right.
workaround of, we'll still send our men to war
And keep
as
your...
long as we get
yeah.
this land. And
Right.
God says, okay,
Right, right, right,
good.
right.
So they're still going to
Yes.
go. God's still blessing
Right.
them.
Right,
But I think it was because it was going to cause an issue.
right. Yeah, because of course, why everybody goes to war and you don't have to go to war, right? You can stay here. But there's many... Right, well, that they're already inhabiting that land, yes. Yes, right?
Yeah, the funny thing to me, I mean, I don't know, I think strangely sometimes, but when the children of Israel went to war, they crossed the Jordan, they marched around Jericho 7 times, blew their trumpets, and the walls fell out.
Right,
They didn't do a whole lot of war because God took care of the war.
right, right, right.
So I don't really see the problem with them not going, but the discouragement was what was, it's kind of like
Concerning,
leaven.
right.
I've been talking a lot about bread. Well, he talks a lot about bread, I listen.
Yeah.
And leaven just seems to spread, and same thing with discouragement.
Right.
Think about the 12. 10 of them discouraged
Right,
40 years worth of death.
right, right,
So, I mean, I can see where Moses
Right.
did a little bit, like, wait a minute,
right,
you're not doing this. And he goes through the whole recount of
Right,
what happened
right.
previous.
right.
But, them going to war, obviously, was
Yeah.
an okay situation.
Mhm.
And I don't think it was the war in and of itself, the fact that they needed to be together.
Just gonna settle down and...
It's kind of like us as a congregation. When we're going to do something, whether you want to do it, we still want to do it together.
Right, right,
It's about
Right.
encouragement
yeah,
and not being discouraged.
right. And it's great that they picked on that and say, okay, we'll do it together. So our time is up and we are almost done with the book of Numbers. Are there any other things that you wanted to talk in the book of Numbers? We pretty much cover all the highlights. We see here chapter 33, the Israel journey from Egypt is reviewed, and they start to appoint boundaries over Canaan and city for Levites, so and city for refugees, and it just pretty much ends. I didn't see any specific sections for the rest of remaining book of Numbers, but we will leave it here. Obviously, we are finishing the book of Numbers tonight, technically. And starting next week and tonight, going forward, when you read again, just reference your schedule for reading at the end of the Bible, and you're going to go into the book of Deuteronomy. And next week, we're going to study in the book of Deuteronomy. So with that said, we're going to have one closing song, number 715, and then we're going to have Barrett lead us in the closing prayer.
This world is not my home, I'm just a passing through. you. My treasures are laid out somewhere beyond the blue. The angels beckon me from heaven's open door, and I can't feel at home in this world anymore. Oh Lord, you know I have no friend like you. If heaven's not my home, then Lord, what will I do? The angels beckon me from heaven's open door, and I can't feel at home in this world anymore. They're all expecting me, and that's one thing I know. My Savior pardoned me, and now I onward go. I know He'll take me through, though I am weak and poor, and I can't feel at home in this world anymore. Oh Lord, you know I have no friend like you. If heaven's not my home, then Lord, what will I do? The angels beckon me from heaven's open door, and I can't feel at home in this world anymore. Dressed up in glory land, we'll live eternally. The saints on every hand are shouting victory. Their songs of sweetest praise drift back from heaven's shore, and I can't feel at home in this world anymore. Oh Lord, you know I have no friend like you. If heaven's not my home, then Lord, what will I do? The angels beckon me from heaven's open door, and I can't feel at home in this world anymore. Let us pray. Dear God, we thank you for this day you have given to us where we can come to worship you, to read from the book of Numbers, to understand who you are and the character that you have for us and what you expect from us. Continue to watch over and bless all of us as we leave this place of worship. Continue to open our minds to your word and to have it on our mind constantly so we can be that voice to the world who needs to hear you. Continue to guide our steps, Lord, each and every day. Continue to be with us and help us to focus on you and not the temptations that are around us. Let this be our prayer in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.